Pokemon Legends ZA is the latest release to come out in the Pokemon series. Originally, before diving into this title, I was feeling somewhat pessimistic about it and had some pretty low expectations coming from Scarlet and Violet back in 2022. But as naive as this may sound, the development silence between Scarlet and Violet up until the launch of Legends ZA gave me some hope for their newest installment. If you look at Game Freak's release output from the Switch era Pokemon games, they were pumping out these titles constantly, sometimes even releasing games twice a year. The polish and quality of these modern installments were met with a lot of backlash and controversy because of this. But this time around, they finally slowed down with their release output to some degree of self-restraint. If you don't count the DLC for Scarlet and Violet, it's been 3 years between Pokemon entries, which is something a lot of fans including myself have been wanting them to do for a while now, with them actually slowing down and making more competent releases that don't embarrass themselves. So, has Game Freak finally delivered with Pokemon Legends ZA? Let's find out. Unlike how I typically go about my other video game reviews and retrospectives on this channel, I do think that in order to better articulate my opinions towards this title as transparently as possible, that some introductions are necessary. This is in order to better outline to the audience what I would consider makes a good Pokemon game. This is since, as we all know, this series can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Everyone's own idea of what makes a good Pokemon game can vary greatly between one another, and I mean we are all individuals at the end of the day. The Pokemon series of games genuinely need no introduction, but like with every long-running video game series, what one fan might compliment and enjoy out of a new installment might be something that another simply hates and is the downfall of its franchise. I'll keep this brief, so oddly enough, my first Pokemon game was Sword back in 2019. Before then, I had practically no connection to this series outside of Super Smash Bros. But after playing that title, I eventually went back and played most of the previous mainline generations to better understand this series and why it's so beloved. As it stands from the games I've played, Black and White are my favourite entries in this series. On the gameplay level, every mainline title is almost identical, but to me Black and White stood out more because of its story, characters and overall presentation. Outside of Generations 4 and 9, I've enjoyed my time with every one of these games that I've played, and I made sure to play X and Y just before the release of Legends ZA so I can get a better understanding of it. My own metric for what makes a good Pokemon game might spit in the face of some of the more die-hard fans, since I simply have no strong nostalgia connection to the previous games in this series. A good story, memorable characters and fun gameplay is what I personally want, and if Game Freak have to 180 just what makes a Pokemon game to achieve this, then I say that's a worthy trade. I mean, it's not like the previous games are going anywhere. Anyway, with all that being said, man, playing through this game was something special. This was the first time where I've actually felt immersed in the quote-unquote world of Pokemon. You know, that speech at the start of every single game that breaks the show don't tell rule. Legends ZA is definitely what I would consider the closest that this series has ever felt to reaching that vision that the brand has always tried to sell you on, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's start off by talking about the biggest pushing change introduced in Pokemon Legends ZA. It's one of the first things you notice when launching the game for the first time and was a big push for its marketing, that being how combat this time around is action oriented and no longer turn based. There's been a complete overhaul to the series' combat in Legends ZA. Pokemon still attack with their same moves and typing still exists, however all of this happens in real time. Attacks can be physically dodged by moving around, and your actual positioning now matters, which adds way more of the player compared to previous games, with every move now having cooldowns and wind-up animations to consider. This new overhaul to battling is by far the best aspect that Pokemon Legends ZA has going for it. Its moment-to-moment combat feels way more engaging when compared to previous titles where you was mostly just spamming your strongest moves to get through the game's story. The faster combat also makes sense here, since battling other trainers to rank up is literally the name of the game. You do these a lot, which would feel like an absolute slog if it was still turn-based. But despite really enjoying this new combat system, it's definitely not without a few faults. In basic encounters against either trainers, it can go by a bit too quickly to not really feel like any level of substance and strategy is being utilised by the player. Let me give an example of another action RPG series to better explain what I mean here. So in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, things are very similar to Legends ZA. You have blades with different elements and drivers that rely on each other to deal damage, alongside cooldowns and attack animations to consider. Anyway, so in this game, there's a ton of depth when it comes to how you approach the different enemies. Combat encounters feel more expressive with the tools that the game gives you. For instance, you can stun enemies by using a break, topple and launch combo, not to mention there are also chain attacks, which is what you're building meter towards, which adds a whole other layer of strategy to its combat system. Pokemon Legends ZA does have the foundation for some incredible moments when it comes to its combat, which we'll be looking at in just a few moments. But its trainer and wild Pokemon fights feel a bit too limiting since there isn't any real strategy outside of using your strongest move to most likely one-shot the enemy. But I mean, this faster paced and somewhat mindless gameplay does lend itself excellently to its new player versus player mode. I originally thought that I'd hate this mode at first, but on a casual level in a Discord call fighting against your friends and then switching out Pokemon to attack one another, it's a surprisingly good time. I almost feel like they should have done more with this PvP mode, maybe add some extra maps, items, split screen, stage hazards, Smash Bros characters. It looks mindless at first, but I'll take this any day over an actual competitive mode since it's fun and that's all that really matters at the end of the day. Okay, so combat at first might be hit or miss for some, but where Legends ZA truly delivers when it comes to its gameplay is also what many will consider was the most important element that it had to get right. That being how this game goes about the fan favourite return of Mega Evolutions. Now obviously previous games had Mega Evolved Pokemon, but in Legends ZA there's way more of a focus on them. Even before mentioning the best part of them, the fact that this game now shows Mega Evolved Pokemon moving around just adds an extra bit of personality to all of them. Look at Mega Starmie for instance, a lot of its personality is in how uncanny its walk animation looks, which wouldn't have existed if this game stayed turn-based. I was never really sold on Megas, even after playing the game that they originally came from. And I feel like a big reason for this is how the presentation of the older games didn't really do them justice in my opinion. For example, seeing Mega Venusaur from the back and stationary most of the time in game didn't really showcase its design or personality very well. Whereas in Legends ZA, all of the Megas both old and new once again feel like part of the world of Pokemon. I'm no longer using my imagination to animate these creatures, pretending what's happening on screen is cool and I'm instead seeing it all happen in front of me. They're standing beside the trainer moving about, so you literally see more of their model than just the back of them like in X and Y. And I mean, it's really great encountering all of the new Megas in Legends ZA. I was kind of worried at first with their limited advertising, but some props have to go to Game Freak here for keeping most of these a secret and allowing players to be surprised by their inclusion, which is one of the best parts about playing these games. Avoiding the absolute bullet hell online that was Game Freak leaks and spoilers was definitely worth it in the end. Most of the old Mega Pokemon are here outside of Mythicals as well as the Gen 3 starters and legendaries. My personal favourite new Megas have to be Mega Chandelure since it's just a bigger fancier Chandelier which is honestly just perfect, as well as Mega Frostlass for looking like something from Silent Hill Air for Fatal Frame. Some honourable mentions have to go to Mega Starmie for just how bizarre it looks, and seeing a Gen 8 Mega with Phalins constructing themselves is pretty cool and it's a cute design. Stay strong little guy. There's a great blend of goofy and cool Mega designs here. As someone who was never really sold on them at first, I'm definitely a fan of Mega Pokemon now because of how Legends ZA goes about reintroducing them. I'll also be joining that side of the fanbase that constantly begs for them to come back in every future entry moving forward. Oh wait, I still haven't mentioned how they're implemented into ZA's gameplay. Oops. Moving back on track, throughout the game you'll encounter rogue Megas which act as boss fights, and these are my favourite part of Legends ZA. Your attention is split between rolling away from their attacks and sending out your Pokemon whenever you find an opening. This all reminded me of the game Astral Chain, albeit in a more simple form, with you controlling two characters around at once with separate health meters to watch out for. I definitely died a few times in these fights, but they don't require you to grind or anything like that. Just roll the attacks and hit the rogue Pokemon and build up enough meter to unleash your own Mega against a boss. And I mean, there's loads of these fights littered throughout the game. I just wish they were accompanied by some dungeon to get through beforehand, since they can just be out in the open, which can look a bit cheap, but other than that I can't sing the praises enough for these rogue Mega encounters. If you're going into this game blind, the sudden flashbang of seeing a new Mega followed by destroying your trainer is really a sight to behold. There's a nice blend here of real-time strategy with rolling around and the serious roots having you choosing the right typing and moves to deal damage with. I could easily talk about them all day, but let's move on and look at why these fights are even happening in the first place by looking at how well Legend ZA goes about telling its story this time around. As you would expect, things are fairly simple, with its main hook being to get through the ZA Royale tournament, which is this huge event involving you ranking up to fight against the game's strongest trainers. Some characters from X and Y do return here alongside the slower newcomers. It's the closest a Pokemon title has ever felt towards having a sequel outside of Black and White 2. Lumiose as a city still feels big. Game Freak's approach of having a smaller area that feels more focused and dense is something I feel like paid off more than the empty open world of Scarlet and Violet. It gets a few things right because of this in my opinion, like how its day and night cycle actually affects what you do in the city itself. Most games have it where a day and night cycle is purely cosmetic, but in Legend ZA, night is the only time where you can do these trainer battles to get enough points to rank up. It's also a breath of fresh air to actually be incentivized to do these fights, since in previous games trainer battles were more of a punishment for bumping into them on a route. Anyway, so at night you pretty much just battle, and during the day you can choose how you want to approach the ZA Royale, be it catching Pokemon, leveling up, exploring, or doing the game's various side quests. The side quests in Legend ZA have a surprising amount of personality to them. There's a lot of optional quests that you can do, but they never overstay their welcome. I swear though, some of these NPCs say the most bizarre and strange things and I can't help but love it. Once again, it's showing you what this world of Pokemon actually is. I know I keep harking on that quote, but like I said before, this is the first time I've ever actually felt immersed and sold on this line that they've been saying for literal generations. On a more critical note however, I'm not really a fan of how most of the NPCs are scattered across Lumiose. I mean this in a literal sense, they are literally scattered across the map. They sort of just load in and stand around doing nothing. It can look a bit awkward. Also, looking back at the story, I do wish they went more in depth on how these wild zones are being built. They do mention it here and there with the townsfolk protesting about how they hate them, but it never really escalates into anything, and I kind of feel like the villain with how you help out the President Jet over this issue and she's the one building them. Like, imagine this in real life, you run a cafe or restaurant and all of a sudden your local government decides to place a wild zone directly around your building without a Pokemon being on your doorstep. It would have been cool to explore an NPC being a victim of this and have you help them out in the story, but you're constantly aligned with the opposing side that wants to construct tons of wild zones. But I mean, more wild zones does mean more Pokemon to catch for the player, which is a good thing. Is this what they call ludonarrative dissonance? Wow, I hate that word. Sorry local businessman, but I've got a Pokedex to fill out. One thing that this game's story does get right outside of its incredible final act, which we'll be taking a look at in the spoiler section of this video, is how Zygarde has an integral role in the Pokemon game for once. He's no longer given the short end of the stick to go live out in a random cave somewhere. It's by far my favourite legendary of Generation 6, so seeing it pretty much be the only legendary of any importance in the plot felt deserved this time around. I do wish however that we got a little more out of the general story for Legend ZA. Each of the trainers have amazing designs and one-off personalities, but I do wish they had more screen time, maybe even an arc or two. You do interact with them during the story, but I could never say more about a character like Kanari for example, outside of the fact that she likes video games and is a streamer. Once again, it can feel like that tell don't show approach that a lot of these games do, which leaves me wanting more out of these trainer interactions. All of their designs are great and filled with personality. Gwyn's in particular had my favourite design. It's always cool when they base a character's look on a pre-existing Pokemon. Granted, there isn't really a whole lot going on with them beneath the surface, but it is supposed to be a more light-hearted story, so it does fit in with what people expect out of this series. Maybe I'm the one at fault here for having unreal expectations and wanting a Trails in the Sky level narrative where every NPC has literal pages of info on their backstories, timeline and relationships. That would be my ideal way to write some of these characters, but I can understand that's not for everyone. Moving on, before reaching spoiler territory, I'd like to also discuss some more miscellaneous points that stood out to me whilst playing Pokemon Legend ZA. Firstly, man, the soundtrack for this game is some of the best that this series has to offer. I like the Lumiose City track, and I'm surprised that whilst playing this game for over 50 hours that I haven't found it annoying whatsoever. Its use of jazz and techno really blends together nicely. The music in this game is worth complimenting alone. It's hard to do it justice in a video review, but it's definitely worth giving a listen to. I just wish that we had more music tracks, since a lot of these songs do repeat, but they all sound good enough to where this never bothered me. It's more quality over quantity, which isn't a bad thing. Things might get a touch controversial with this next point, but please hear me out. So graphically, I'm a little mixed on this title. It's a big step up from Scarlet and Violet, but there wasn't really any direction to go from that game other than up. Anyway, so in the outside areas, I like what they went for with some of the in-game art for different advertisements, but some areas do look better than others. For instance, a lot of the interior locations look great and feel lifting, but the bigger, more longer areas lack a bit of visual identity and can look a bit bland. Oddly enough, when you're up on the roofs, the game does look better in terms of its art direction. I can't really explain why this is. Maybe it's because being up in a building is just visually more interesting than being in a generic crowded area. I also think that the skybox in this game is pretty bland looking, with the only notable set piece being Lumio's tower, and that's it. Whenever you look up, it's just so empty, and some planes or blimps or something would have gone a long way to mask this fact. The game's side quests are a good way to flesh out and add some life to Lumio's, but it should have gone further with this idea and maybe taken some inspiration from the Yakuza series and littered the place with small mini games and side attractions. Imagine if they had Pokemon pinball or fishing or bowling with online, just some activities to give Lumio's more life would have gone a long way here. I also found popping to be a small issue on the Switch 2 version of this title. I'm pretty sure this is the reason that you never unlock roller skates or a bike like in previous games, since I'm sure it would have revealed more of these technical flaws. That being said, the fast travel here is extremely snappy and quick with its load times. The quality of life features in general are phenomenal in Legend ZA. Pokemon now show their evolutions on the pause screen, so you can choose when or if you want to evolve them. There's no longer an NPC that teaches you different moves, instead it's all done through the menus with no mid-game battle interruptions telling you if you want to learn a new move. I never liked this in the older titles by the way, it felt so clunky. I'm nearly done with these miscellaneous points, but I also have probably the most obvious complaint that is very much warranted towards these modern Pokemon games, and that's simple: why on earth is there no voice acting in Legend ZA? It will always blow my mind that Game Freak had the budget for Ed Sheeran to sing a Pokemon song for the credits of Scarlet and Violet, but not think to spend that same money on, I don't know, actual voice acting? It's as jarring here as it's always been. It's certainly not a stylistic choice, and when a series like Trails has had voice acting in their 100-hour JRPG since 2013, you know this is nothing but sheer penny pinching on Game Freak's end. Also, if I'm gonna air out more of these obvious complaints, I may as well mention how they still rely way too much on these cuts between animations to get around not animating certain scenes. These always look cheap and tacky. It's one of those techniques that once you notice it, you'll never be able to unsee it. Some other minor complaints I have is why are trade evolutions in this release? You can only trade privately, no global trade system. I always saw the Legends games as more single player oriented, so this can be a minor annoyance if you wanted to fill out your Pokedex. I don't know where else to put this point, but I also wish that we actually went into Lumio's tower in the game, but we never actually physically enter it, which is strange since it's constantly there taunting you in the distance. Okay, one last final piece of criticism: why on earth isn't there a brighter shade of green for the character's hair? Alright, moving on, I've complained long enough. Before reaching this video's conclusion, I think it's necessary to talk about the finale and post-game for Pokemon Legends ZA, so here is your spoiler warning for this video. Please skip to this timestamp if you'd like to avoid spoilers. The final act for Legends ZA is pretty grand. I enjoyed seeing some of the plot lines from X and Y get resolved. Returning characters such as Lysander and AC wanting to correct their past mistakes made for some good fan service overall. But I was a bit confused at first. Daisy doesn't really do anything in the game's story until the final act. He kinda just stands there almost as if he's waiting for Never mind. He did remind me a lot of Liquid Snake from Metal Gear Solid 4. Someone who's way past their prime and just wants to set the world straight in however which way they can. He kinda just looks done with life, which really reminded me of that one Liquid Snake meme. The final act against Mega Floette is amazing. You have this whole set piece play out, meanwhile you're fending against a ton of rogue Megas. This all tops off with Mega Zygarde absolutely destroying it. I have no negatives here. I'm surprised AZ died in the end, but it all makes sense. He even knew it would happen and kept it a secret from everyone else. Which I mean is pretty sad all things considered. It's a fitting end to one of Pokemon's most beloved and well-written characters. The amount of well-written fan service that's in Legends ZA only makes me imagine the impact that future Legends games could have for the return of certain fan favorite characters. Afterwards, you unlock the post-game and it's in line with what you'd expect out of other games in this series. I did have fun with it, collecting every Pokemon and unlocking Xerneas, Yveltal and Zygarde. When compared to other Pokemon post-games, it's up there, but I'm not sure it's as good as Ultra Sun and Ultra Moons, but the fight against Zygarde might have given it a slight edge here. It's still early days however, so I'm not really sure on my opinions on this at the minute. Wow though, as a once jaded fan, Legends ZA has reinvigorated my stance on these games. I still think that Game Freak should put more time and money into these games, they can clearly afford to, but this title outside of its flaws is what I would consider an almost perfect Pokemon title. It's by far the most immersed that I've felt in this fictional world, and it finally won me over on the actual concept of the world of Pokemon. I also think, despite how out there of a statement that this may be, that the Pokemon game should stay action RPGs moving forward. It feels less mindless and actually has the player engage with its mechanics opposed to using the same strong move once you understand what typing advantages are. There's still room for improvements here and there, but this new combat system shows promise. Sword and Shield introduced Gigantamax in, after that Scarlet and Violet brought Terrestrialization, two mechanics that didn't really change the way that the turn-based games were being played. And as much as I hate to admit it here, it was only in an action RPG format where I started to enjoy Megas as a concept, and X and Y served a similar purpose on a gameplay level, albeit with way better visual diversity and stat changes. Legends ZA is the first time that I felt like a game in this series has played differently, which after 25 years is worth celebrating. Now, I don't hate turn-based RPGs, some of my favourite games are turn-based and I've mentioned a lot of them on this channel. But playing through Pokemon's backlog of mainline entries really does outline on a gameplay level that things have become stagnant. And I'm not of the belief that implementing a new type-in or adding another gimmicky strong button to put in advertising is going to make its turn-based formula engaging and fun anytime soon. Game series constantly change and evolve to stay interesting and entertaining. The turn-based Pokemon games in the modern day would be like if Mario and Sonic stayed 2D, or if the Zelda series remained at Ocarina of Time instead of evolving in what will become Breath of the Wild. I know most monopolies don't even bother with changing up their core gameplay since, well, safe thing equals signs money, so this is why I'm complimenting Game Freak's attempt at least trying something new that isn't just surface level marketing stunts. Look, all I'm saying is make the next Pokemon title more like Xenoblade or even Astral Chain and we're looking at a perfect game. But with all that being said, I'm very curious, what did you think about Pokemon Legends ZA? Did you agree or disagree with some of the points made in this video? Feel free to let me know in the comment section and let's keep things respectful. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.